You're listening to Short Inspirations from Ralph. What's your motivation? Part 2. Jesus often talked about the motivation of the heart and those things that lurk deep within our souls. And a great example of this is found with the parable of the sower in Matthew 13, where a sower goes out to sow and there's 4 types of ground that the seed falls on. A few of these are interesting, particularly the one where the ground is stony and the seed falls there and the plant springs up and does well. But then when the sun came up, the plant withered because it had very few roots. They weren't deep enough, and that's what we were talking about in the first episode. The motivations of our hearts can be shallow, can be concerned only with the natural world we have. The other form of ground related to weeds coming up and thorns, and they choked the plants. And that's because of this thing called anxiety, which is the cares and pursuits and troubles of this world choke a person. But there's another type of ground which is interesting, which is the hard ground, which the seed falls on and then the birds of the air come and take it away. So nothing's really planted. And that speaks of hardness of heart and absolute resistance to come anywhere near some sort of spiritual quest to really find out what the motivations of our heart should be. A sort of a seeing is believing only stance, and don't give me any of that religious stuff. And so again, our motivations stay very shallow. There are many, many urges and motivations that have been installed in us from the hand of God. The strong desire to stay alive, for example, to be able to pursue this thing called happiness, to be able to provide shelter and food and to work and to make money. The motivation to reproduce after our own kind is very powerful. To have intimacy. In Romans 12, there's a list of motivations, 7 of them. There's leadership, there's the motivation to give, to inspire, to teach. But most of us have this thing called mercy. But there is one major motivation which I haven't mentioned yet. It probably is the one thing that trumps everything. Paul spends a whole chapter on this thing in 1 Corinthians 13, because it's so important. This is what he says: until then, when we understand everything, there are 3 things that remain: faith, hope, and love. Yet love surpasses them all. So above all else, let love be the beautiful prize for which you run. And then John in his letter digs right into this. And he says this in 1 John 4, 7 and 8. Those who are loved by God, let his love continually pour out from you to one another, because God is love. Everyone who loves is fathered by God and experiences an intimate knowledge of him. The one who doesn't love has yet to know God, for God is love. Note that he's not saying that God has love or it's one of his many virtues. It actually says God is love, and that makes a massive difference. And so the greatest motivation that we're to have is of love itself. And this defies evolutionary thinking, that is the survival of the fittest, because love doesn't fit into that. When Mother Teresa cared for the sick and dying in Calcutta, it wasn't anything to do with the survival of the fittest. It was pouring out God's love into those people. Of course, all of these urges and motivations and pushes and drives that we have stay within the boundaries and with the auspices of the Word of God. And that's why it's important to read that and to have that in our systems. But the 2 things that I've mentioned, the main 2 things that I've mentioned to do with what is your motivation. The first one I mentioned in the last episode, which is to be a person who pursues God with all your heart so that you can leave a spiritual blessing, a generational blessing on those that we influence now and for those who come after us. The second one is this great thing called love. And in 1 Corinthians 13 that we've read before, I'll read it in the Message to finish. But for right now, until that completeness, we have 3 things to do to lead us towards that consummation. Trust steadily in God, hope unswervingly, love extravagantly. And the best of these 3 is love. God bless you.